He had been living in the small town for a little over a year, and most people still didn't know much about him. He kept to himself, never caused trouble, and was always polite when spoken to. The folks at the grocery store called him Sir, though he never asked for it. To them, he was just another quiet man who preferred peace over small talk. He lived alone in a small wooden house just outside of town, surrounded by trees and silence. His name was Jack Rains, though few people even knew that much. He didn't wear military shirts or hang medals on the wall. There were no signs of who he used to be. No framed photos, no flags, no stories told over coffee. If you passed by his place early in the morning, you'd only see him outside with his dog. A large Belgian Malinois named Rex. Rex was a beautiful animal, calm, alert, and loyal in a way that made you feel his eyes could see right through you. He was trained, though nobody in the town knew just how well. Every morning before sunrise, Jack and Rex went for a run down the dirt road that cut through the forest. The rhythm of their footsteps echoed in the still air. Sometimes people driving by would wave and Jack would nod, but that was all. He liked it that way. Jack had come to this place after leaving behind a world most people could never imagine. For 20 years, he served in the military, the kind of service no one talks about openly. Missions that never made the news, places that didn't officially exist. He was part of the Delta Force, one of the most skilled and secretive groups there were. But that was another life, a life that left him with more scars inside than out. When he retired, he didn't throw a party or move to a big city. He wanted quiet, a kind of silence that didn't carry the sound of helicopters or gunfire in the distance. So he found this small town surrounded by woods and open land and decided it would do. He bought the old house that had been sitting empty for years, fixed it up with his own hands, and built a new life out of simple things. Rex had been with him since his final years in the service. They'd been paired during a mission overseas, and their bond had been instant. Rex had saved his life more than once, sniffing out explosives, warning him of danger before anyone else noticed. When Jack left the military, he couldn't leave Rex behind. He went through all the paperwork and brought him home. They understood each other without words. When Jack sat on the porch, Rex would lie at his feet. When Jack took a slow walk through the woods, Rex would stay just a few steps ahead, ears perked, scanning for movement. They were two souls who had seen enough of the world to know that peace was fragile, and that it had to be protected. The townspeople sometimes saw Jack at the local hardware store or feed shop. He never seemed unfriendly, just distant, as if his thoughts were always somewhere else. People respected that. They had their own lives, and farmers, mechanics, shop owners, and they figured everyone had their reasons for being the way they were. But there was one person who noticed him more than most, an older man named Mr. Jenkins, who ran the general store. He'd been in the Korean War decades ago, and though time had taken his strength, his memory of service never faded. He recognized the look in Jack's eyes, that quiet, heavy calm that soldiers carried long after they came home. "Dog like that," Jenkins once said as Jack paid for a bag of feed, "he's got training in him. Ain't just a pet, is he?" Jack gave a small smile. "He's family," he said simply. Jenkins nodded. He didn't ask any more questions. Some things didn't need to be said aloud. Most evenings, Jack would cook dinner, then take Rex out to the backfield. The sun would dip behind the trees, painting the sky with soft orange light. Jack would throw a stick or sometimes just walk while Rex circled him protectively. It was the kind of life that didn't make headlines. But for Jack, it was all he ever wanted. He spent his days repairing fences, fixing small engines, and sometimes helping neighbors when their tools broke. People started to like him in quiet ways, not through words, but through nods and waves. The mailman would leave his packages by the gate with a note saying, "Good morning, sir." Kids from down the road sometimes watched Rex perform tricks, amazed at how the dog followed every command instantly. "Sit." Rex sat. "Stay." Rex froze like a statue. The kids would laugh, clapping their hands, and Jack would smile just enough to show a bit of warmth. But even in peace, the past has a way of whispering. Sometimes late at night, Jack would wake up in a cold sweat, hearing echoes of sounds that weren't really there, the hum of rotor blades, the pop of distant gunfire, the voice of a teammate calling his name through static. Rex would be there, pressing his head against Jack's hand, grounding him in the present. Those were the moments that reminded Jack why he'd chosen this quiet life. He often told Rex stories, not out loud to share them, but to release them. "You remember that night in Kandahar?" He'd say softly, staring at the stars. Rex would tilt his head as if he did. "We made it through that one, didn't we?" It wasn't just talking to a dog. It was talking to the one creature who'd been there through it all and never judged him. The townspeople never asked about his past, and he never offered it. But they noticed how disciplined Rex was, how calm, how controlled. If a car backfired, Rex didn't flinch. If a stranger came near Jack, Rex stood still but watchful. To most, he looked like a guard dog. To Jack, he was something deeper, a link to a world that had nearly destroyed him but also shaped him into who he was. Over time, Jack's small cabin became known for its neatness. His tools were always in order, his yard clean, his firewood stacked in perfect rows. There was a sense of purpose in everything he did. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply keeping structure, the kind that had once kept him alive. The neighbors respected him, but not everyone understood him. A few people whispered that he was odd. Some said he was too strict with his dog, though they never saw him raise his voice. He didn't care. He wasn't there to win approval. One autumn evening, as leaves began to turn gold, Jack was sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee. The sun was setting, and Rex was lying nearby watching the woods. It was the kind of peaceful moment Jack lived for, quiet, simple, perfect. Then a car slowed down by the dirt road. Two young men inside were laughing, their music loud. They yelled something at Jack's property, just fooling around, but Rex stood up instantly, barking once, sharp and commanding. The car sped away, tires kicking up dust. Jack watched them go, then looked at Rex. "Good boy," he said gently, patting his head. "That's enough." Rex calmed immediately and sat back down. That night, though, the sound of that car stuck in Jack's head. Not because of what happened, but because it reminded him how fragile peace could be. In his old world, a single sound, with a sudden noise, a wrong movement, could mean danger. He shook the thought off, reminding himself that this was different. This was home now. Still, he made sure to check the locks before bed and kept Rex close. Over the next few days, Jack went about his life as usual. He repaired a neighbor's fence, fixed an old lawnmower, and spent time training Rex as part of their daily routine. The bond between them seemed unbreakable. Rex wasn't just obedient. He was deeply connected to Jack's emotions. If Jack was calm, Rex was calm. If Jack was tense, Rex would rise and look around, as if sensing something invisible. People who saw them together couldn't help but feel something special, like the two had been through more than anyone could guess. Sometimes, in the early morning fog, Jack would stand by the lake near his home, Rex beside him, both still and silent. The water reflected the gray sky and the air smelled of pine. He'd take a deep breath, feeling that familiar ache, not sadness, but a quiet awareness that life had changed forever. He had survived things he didn't talk about. He had seen friends fall and missions fail. But standing there with Rex, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: safety. The people in town came to trust him more as time went on. If someone's tractor broke down, Jack would help fix it. If an old woman needed her fence repaired, he'd show up without asking for money. He didn't do it for praise. Helping gave him purpose. It filled the empty spaces left by years of service and loss. At the local diner, people began greeting him by name. "Morning, Jack," they'd say, and he'd nod politely. He never stayed long, usually taking his coffee to go, but little by little, the community began to see him not as a mystery, but as one of their own. What no one could see, though, was how carefully Jack had built this fragile peace. Every part of his life, his routines, his quiet habits, his distance, was there for a reason. It kept him grounded. It kept the memories at bay. And above all, it kept Rex safe, because for Jack, Rex wasn't just a dog. He was the last living piece of the world Jack had left behind. The only one who truly understood the weight he carried, and the only one who never needed an explanation. In that quiet town, surrounded by fields and forest, Jack had finally found something close to peace. He didn't know how long it would last, but for now that was enough. He believed that if he kept his head down and stayed kind, the world would leave him alone. He didn't know that soon. Everything he'd built, every moment of calm, every ounce of healing, would be tested in a way he never expected. For now, though he sat on his porch with Rex at his feet, the sound of crickets filling the air, unaware that the life he'd fought so hard to protect was about to change forever. The next few days passed quietly, the kind of quiet that Jack had grown to appreciate. The mornings were crisp, the air smelled of pine, and the world seemed peaceful again. Rex was full of energy, running circles around the yard as Jack stacked firewood. It was one of those calm stretches of time where nothing seemed to go wrong. Jack had begun to believe that this life, this slow rhythm, might actually last. He had stopped checking the locks twice before bed. He had started sleeping through the night without waking from the old memories that used to haunt him. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere again. Every morning, he'd drink his coffee on the porch while Rex lay beside him, half asleep but always alert. The sound of birds mixed with the hum of distant farm machines. Sometimes the mailman would wave from the road and Jack would lift a hand in return. Life had finally settled into a pattern that felt steady and safe. Then came the evening that changed everything. It started like any other. The sun was setting behind the trees and Jack was cooking a simple dinner, beans, bread, and eggs. Rex sat near the door waiting for his share. Outside the air was still, except for the occasional rustle of wind through the branches. Jack was just about to sit down when he heard something, a faint noise like movement near the fence line. Rex's ears perked up immediately. The dog stood, muscles tense, eyes focused on the darkening yard. Jack set down his fork and stepped outside. "What is it, boy?" he asked softly. Rex didn't bark, but his body stayed rigid. He was trained to react only when something was really there. Jack followed his gaze toward the side of the property where the trees met the open field. He saw a shadow move, a figure small and uncertain. Then came laughter. It was the same two young men who had driven past a few nights before, the ones who had shouted from their car. They were walking along the fence now, tossing rocks at the wooden posts, laughing loudly, probably not realizing whose land they were near. Jack sighed. He didn't want trouble. He never did. He walked to the edge of the yard, keeping his voice calm. "Evening," he called out. "You fellas lost?" The two men stopped, startled by his sudden appearance. One of them laughed nervously. "Nah, we're just passing through," he said. "This is private property," Jack replied. "You can keep walking on the road if you don't mind." His voice wasn't angry, just firm. He didn't like confrontation, but he also wasn't someone to be pushed around. Rex stood beside him, not barking, just watching with sharp, steady eyes. The young men muttered something under their breath and moved off toward the road again. Jack waited until they were gone, then gave Rex a light pat. "It's all right," he said softly. "They're gone." Rex wagged his tail once and relaxed. Jack went back inside, trying to brush it off. He didn't realize how fast things could turn from nothing to something bigger. A few hours later, as darkness settled over the town, the sound of car tires on gravel echoed again. This time the headlights swung across his yard. The same car pulled up near the gate, engine rumbling. Jack stayed inside at first, watching from the window. He could see the two young men again, this time with another friend in the back seat. They were laughing, playing music loudly and shining a flashlight toward his house. Rex stood near the door, growling softly. Jack felt frustration rise. Not anger, just that uneasy feeling that comes when peace is threatened. He opened the door and stepped out, holding a flashlight. "That's enough," he said evenly. "Move along," one of the men laughed. "We're just having fun, old man." "Not here you're not," Jack replied. His voice didn't rise, but there was a tone in it that made most men back off. Rex barked once, a short, deep sound that carried through the air. That bark changed everything. The men suddenly got louder, taunting him, pretending to be afraid of the dog. "Careful, he might bite," one shouted. Jack didn't move. "You should go," he said again. Eventually they did. The car sped off, leaving behind a cloud of dust and laughter fading into the night. Jack stood there for a long moment, looking out at the empty road. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. He had come here to escape the kind of nonsense that filled the world elsewhere. But he reminded himself, small towns had their share of bored troublemakers too. He turned back toward the house, Rex walking faithfully at his side. The next morning, everything seemed normal again. The sun came up and the sound of birds returned. Jack made coffee, fed Rex, and tried to forget about the night before. He even smiled as he watched Rex chase after a thrown stick across the yard. Later that day, though, while he was repairing a section of the back fence, he heard voices again. This time it wasn't the same young men. It was two local officers standing by their patrol car near his property line. Jack walked over, curious. "Morning, officers," he said politely. One of them, a young man with a clipboard, nodded. "Morning, sir. We got a call last night about a disturbance in this area. Some folks said there was a dog acting aggressive." Jack frowned. "Aggressive? My dog doesn't attack people. He barked, that's all." The second officer, older and heavier, glanced toward the yard. "That him?" he asked, pointing at Rex, who was sitting calmly by the porch. "That's him," Jack said. "He's trained. He doesn't bother anyone unless they come too close." The older officer gave a small shrug. "Well, we just have to check. Got a report that someone was threatened by a dog around here." Jack shook his head slowly. "No one was threatened. A few young men were trespassing near my fence last night. I asked them to leave. That's it." The younger officer scribbled something down. "All right, sir. We'll note it. Just keep the dog under control, okay?" "He's under control," Jack said firmly. "Always has been." They nodded and left, but Jack couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling their visit left behind. It wasn't that he distrusted police, he respected the job. But he had seen too many times how misunderstandings could turn serious in an instant. That evening he took extra care to keep Rex close. He didn't let him roam far and made sure the gate was shut tight. Still, he couldn't stop worrying that someone might do something foolish. And as fate would have it, someone did. 2 nights later, when the sky was heavy with clouds and the air smelled of rain, another call went through to the local police station. This time it wasn't just a complaint, it was a report of a dangerous animal loose near the woods. No one knew who made the call, but it set things in motion. Jack was inside, reading by the dim light of a lamp when Rex's ears shot up again. A deep growl rumbled in his chest. Then came the sound of tires, voices, and the slam of car doors. Jack stood puzzled and walked toward the front door. Through the window, he could see flashing lights reflecting off the trees. 2 patrol cars had stopped by the road, and beams of flashlights cut through the darkness. "Evening," Jack called out, stepping onto his porch. "What's going on?" He didn't sound alarmed, just confused. One of the officers called back. "Sir, we got a report about a dog loose in this area. Can you bring your animal inside?" "He's already inside the fence," Jack replied. "He's not loose." Rex stood beside him, silent but alert, tail low, watching the movement outside the fence. Then something unexpected happened. A small animal, maybe a raccoon, darted from the bushes near the gate. Rex barked once, sharp and loud, reacting by instinct. The sound echoed in the dark, and in that split second, one of the officers stumbled backward, shouting something Jack couldn't make out. "Easy," Jack said quickly, holding up his hands. "He's just barking." But the confusion grew. Flashlights waved, voices overlapped, and tension filled the air. Jack could feel the situation slipping out of control, the same way he'd seen it happen in far worse places long ago. "Stay," he commanded, his voice firm. Rex froze instantly, obedient as always. Jack tried to explain again, his tone calm but urgent. "He's trained. He won't hurt anyone. Please." But the air was thick with misunderstanding. The officers couldn't hear clearly over the barking and the static from their radios. Everything happened too fast, too suddenly for reason to catch up. And then there was silence, a heavy final silence that Jack would never forget. The lights from the police cars flickered across the yard. The air hung still, heavy with confusion and regret. Jack stood motionless, his breath caught, his eyes fixed on the spot where Rex had stood just moments ago. The officers looked shaken, their voices low, realizing too late that something had gone terribly wrong. Jack didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just knelt down, the weight of everything pressing onto him at once. His whole world, the peace he'd fought to build, was shattered in an instant. One of the officers tried to speak, but Jack couldn't hear him. The sound had gone hollow, like the world itself had gone quiet. It was only when one of them whispered an apology that Jack finally looked up. His eyes weren't angry, just empty. That night, as rain began to fall, Jack sat on his porch long after the police had gone. The flashing lights faded into the distance and the sound of the rain grew steady. The yard was still. Too still. He stayed there until morning, staring out into the gray light, trying to understand how something so small, a few careless words, a moment of fear, could destroy the one thing that made his life whole. He had seen loss before, more times than he could count. But this one hit differently. This was the loss of peace, of trust, of the last piece of his past that had ever made sense. And deep down, beneath the silence and sorrow, something began to stir inside him again, something he thought he had buried forever. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was the unshakable need for truth, because Jack knew one thing for certain. What had happened wasn't right. And someone needed to answer for it. The morning after was quiet in a way that felt wrong. The kind of quiet that made every sound sharper, every breath heavier. Jack sat on the porch, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. The rain had stopped, but the ground was soaked. The air smelled like wet soil and loss. He hadn't slept. His eyes were red, his face pale. He kept staring out at the empty yard where Rex used to run. The collar still lay on the porch beside his boots. He had picked it up once, held it for a few seconds, then set it back down. There was no word strong enough for what he felt. It wasn't just sadness. It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, something that came from losing the only part of his life that still made sense. He could still see the flashing lights, still hear the echo of voices shouting, still see the confusion on their faces when they realized what had happened. He had told them Rex wasn't dangerous. He had begged them to listen. But fear moved faster than reason that night. By sunrise, the officers were gone, leaving behind only apologies and a few words that didn't mean much. It was an accident. We didn't know. We're sorry. But sorry didn't bring Rex back. Sorry didn't erase the memory. When the morning light finally reached the trees, Jack stood and walked into the yard. The grass was bent and muddy where everything had happened. He knelt down and touched the ground, his fingers tracing the earth as if trying to hold on to something that was no longer there. He whispered softly, "You did good, boy. You didn't do anything wrong." It took him hours to gather himself enough to move. When he did, it wasn't to eat or rest, it was to understand. He went inside, took out a notebook, and began to write everything down. The time it happened, the names of the officers, the exact words they said. He wrote it all, carefully and calmly, just like he had done during missions in the past. He wasn't thinking about revenge. He was thinking about truth. That afternoon, a representative from the police department came by. A young woman, polite and professional, holding a clipboard. She explained that an investigation would be opened. "It's standard procedure," she said gently. "We'll look into everything," Jack nodded, but there was something in his eyes that told her he wasn't going to just wait quietly. "Sir," she said carefully, "I know this is hard, but please let the process work." "I've seen how processes work," Jack replied. His voice was calm but firm. "And I've seen how they don't." The woman shifted uncomfortably, then nodded. "We'll keep you informed," she said before leaving. When her car disappeared down the road, Jack went back to the porch. The sun was low now, turning the trees gold. The world around him looked peaceful again, but peace didn't mean the same thing anymore. Over the next few days, the town started to hear about what had happened. Some people came by to offer quiet sympathy. Others avoided him, not knowing what to say. At the general store, Mr. Jenkins shook his hand and said softly, "I heard, son. I'm real sorry. That dog was something special." Jack nodded, unable to say much. He was family. He managed to reply. The word spread, about the incident, about the confusion, about how a calm, disciplined dog ended up gone because of a misunderstanding. People in town were divided. Some defended the police, saying they were just doing their job. Others whispered that it wasn't right, that something had gone wrong. Jack didn't argue with anyone. He just listened. He let people talk. But at home, he was already moving quietly through his own plan. He began visiting the town hall, asking for public records. He filed requests for the incident report, the body camera footage, the dispatch call logs. Most clerks were surprised to see him, a quiet man suddenly asking sharp questions. When one clerk asked him, "Why do you need this?" He simply said, "Because the truth deserves to be seen." He spent long nights reading. He went through every line of the report. It didn't match what he remembered. The time was wrong, the description of events vague. It said dog acting aggressively, even though Rex had never crossed the fence line. It said owner was uncooperative, which couldn't have been further from the truth. Jack sat back in his chair, staring at the paper in disbelief. He had seen lies before, written neatly, hidden under the words official report. It was the same thing he had seen overseas, when mistakes were covered up with careful language, but this time it wasn't happening far away. It was happening here, in the quiet town he had chosen for peace. He closed the folder and leaned back, his hands folded tightly together. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't break anything. He just made a promise to himself. This would not be buried. The next morning he went to the local newspaper office. It was a small building run by an older editor named Tom, who had seen the town's stories for decades. Jack walked in, holding a folder. "You the one who handles reports?" he asked. Tom looked up. "That depends," he said. "What kind of report?" "The kind that people try to hide," Jack said quietly. Tom studied him for a moment, then nodded toward a chair. "Have a seat." Jack opened the folder and slid the papers across the table. "My dog was shot during a police call. The report says it was justified. It wasn't. I have records, timestamps, and copies of the dispatch log. Something's wrong here." Tom scanned the documents, his brow furrowing. "You were a soldier, weren't you?" he asked after a pause. Jack nodded. "Yes," Tom exhaled slowly. "You know what you're doing then." "I'll look into it." Jack thanked him and left. He didn't expect miracles, but he believed that truth had a way of spreading when someone looked closely enough. Over the next week, he kept to himself. He didn't sleep much. He took long walks in the woods where he used to walk with Rex. The air was different now, emptier. But walking helped him think. He began to notice small things, like how one of the officers who had been there that night avoided him in town, or how people at the diner stopped talking when he walked in. It didn't bother him. He knew what silence meant. It meant people were afraid of what might come out. One afternoon, Tom called. "I went through your notes," he said. "You were right. There are inconsistencies. The timestamps don't match, and there's no record of any aggressive behavior before the officers arrived. The call came from an unverified number. Looks like someone reported a dangerous animal without giving their name." Jack's jaw tightened. "Anonymous," he said quietly. "Figures." "I can print a story," Tom said, "but you need to know once it's out there, it's out there. People might not like it." Jack thought for a moment. "Do it," he said. "The truth shouldn't depend on who likes it." A few days later, the article came out. It wasn't sensational. It didn't accuse anyone directly. It just laid out the facts step by step, clearly and calmly. It asked questions about how a trained, contained service dog could be killed during a non-threatening call. The story spread faster than either of them expected. People started talking again, this time louder. Comments online, small protests outside the police department, calls for accountability. Jack didn't join any of them. He stayed home, sitting on the porch like he always did. He didn't need to speak for the truth to be heard. Then one morning he got a call. It was the police chief asking to meet. When they sat down in the small office downtown, the chief looked tired, almost ashamed. "I read the article," he said. "We've reviewed the footage again. You were right. Things weren't handled properly." Jack said nothing, waiting. "The officer involved has been suspended pending a full investigation," the chief continued. "There will be disciplinary action. I can't say more yet, but I wanted to tell you directly." Jack nodded slowly. "That won't bring him back," he said softly. "No," the chief admitted, "but it might prevent it from happening again." Jack looked out the window. The sunlight glinted off the parked cars outside. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Jack said quietly, "That's what matters." When he walked out of the building, the air felt lighter. Not happy, but clearer. He had done what he could. He had found the truth not through anger, but through patience and persistence. That evening, he went back to the spot behind his house where Rex used to sit. The grass had grown back a little, soft and green. He knelt down and placed a small wooden marker there. It wasn't fancy, just carved with the word Rex. He stayed there for a long time, talking softly like he used to. "We did it, boy," he whispered. "We made them listen." The wind moved through the trees gently as if answering. In the days that followed, people began stopping by his house again, not to gossip, but to thank him. Some said his story opened their eyes. Others shared their own experiences of not being heard. Jack listened to them all, patient and kind. He didn't want fame or attention. He just wanted fairness, and little by little, the town began to change. The police department started new training programs for handling service and emotional support animals. Officers learned how to de-escalate situations calmly. Policies were rewritten, and community trust started to rebuild. Jack never claimed credit for any of it. When people asked, he just said, it was the right thing to do. At night, he sometimes still looked out into the quiet yard. It wasn't the same without Rex, but there was peace again. Not the fragile peace that could be taken away, but the kind that came from knowing he had done what was right. The world had hurt him again, but he had chosen to heal it instead of breaking it further. And though he still walked alone, his steps were steady, guided by the memory of a loyal friend who had never once failed him. After the investigation ended, life in the town slowly started to return to normal, at least on the surface. The story of what happened to Rex had spread far beyond the little town. People from other places had heard about the quiet man who had stood up for truth without shouting, without anger, only with calm persistence. Some called him a hero. Jack didn't see himself that way. He didn't want to be anyone's symbol. He just wanted to live in peace again. But peace has a strange way of testing those who seek it. Though the police department had admitted their mistake, Jack knew there was more behind it. Not just one bad night, but a pattern of carelessness, of people being ignored when they tried to speak. The article in the newspaper had opened doors he hadn't meant to open. People started writing letters, sending messages, and knocking on his door. Some came with tears, telling him about their own losses, pets mishandled, property damaged, families dismissed by officials who didn't listen. Others came with quiet gratitude. "You made them change things," one old woman said, clutching his hand. "You gave us hope that someone can still be heard." Jack would just nod. "All I did was tell the truth," he would answer. Still, the attention unsettled him. He had spent his whole life trying not to be noticed. Attention brought questions, and questions often brought misunderstanding. So he stayed away from interviews and cameras. He didn't want a story told about him. He just wanted the truth to keep growing on its own. Tom, the newspaper editor, stopped by one afternoon with more papers in his hands. "The state's taking interest now," he said. "Your case might lead to new policy changes." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Policy?" "Yeah," Tom said. "They're looking at how complaints are handled." "You started something, Jack," Jack smiled faintly. "Then let's hope it goes somewhere good." But as the weeks went on, not everyone liked the attention. Some people in town started whispering that he had embarrassed their community. Others said he was making the police look bad. Jack never responded. He understood that change never came without resistance. He went on with his quiet routines, morning walks, fixing tools, tending the small garden he had planted behind his house. It helped to keep his hands busy. The garden grew stronger each week, small green shoots turning into rows of vegetables. He often spoke softly to the plants as he worked, the way he used to talk to Rex. "You just keep growing," he'd say, one day at a time. But at night, the silence still lingered. Sometimes he would wake up expecting to hear the sound of Rex moving around, the click of claws on the wooden floor. It never came. He would lie there in the dark, listening to the wind in the trees, and think about how strange it was that one moment could change so much. Then one morning a letter arrived. It came from a journalist in the city. The letter was polite, almost hesitant. It said they had read about his case and wanted to talk to him for a larger story, not about the loss, but about accountability, about how ordinary people could make change happen. Jack stared at the letter for a long time. He wasn't sure what to do. Part of him wanted to ignore it, but another part knew that silence often allowed mistakes to repeat. Maybe, he thought, if more people understood what really happened, fewer things like this would occur. So a few days later, he called the number at the bottom of the letter. The journalist's voice was calm and respectful. "Mr. Rains," she said, "thank you for speaking with me. I just want to hear your side of things. Not for drama, just the truth." Jack agreed to meet her at the small cafe near the edge of town. When she arrived, she didn't carry a large camera crew or fancy equipment, just a notebook and a gentle smile. They sat outside, the sound of wind chimes softly filling the pauses between their words. "I've read the reports," she said, "but I want to know what it felt like, not as a headline, but as a person." Jack looked out across the street before answering. "It felt like watching peace disappear," he said quietly. One second, everything was right. The next, it was gone, and it wasn't just about losing him. It was about losing trust. The journalist nodded. And what made you decide to speak out? Jack thought for a long time. Because silence helps no one. I've seen what happens when truth gets buried. It grows into something worse. The interview lasted less than an hour. She didn't ask for drama or tears, just clarity. When it was over, she thanked him and promised to tell his story with care. A week later, her article appeared online. It was titled, "The Quiet Soldier Who Chose Truth Over Silence." It wasn't about the tragedy, it was about healing, about how one man turned grief into something good. It spoke of his calm courage, his patience, and how his actions had inspired changes in policies across multiple counties. The article spread quickly. Messages poured in from people Jack had never met, veterans, police officers, and ordinary citizens who said the story reminded them to stay human in a world that often forgets how. Jack didn't respond to most of them. He wasn't looking for praise, but he did keep one message pinned on his wall, from a police officer in another state. It said, "Your story changed how I do my job. I think about that dog every time I answer a call. Thank you for reminding me to be careful." That single message meant more to him than any award could. Over time, Jack started to see small but real change around him. The new police chief, a younger man with an open mind, visited him one afternoon. "We've started a new program," he explained. "We train our officers now on how to approach service animals and how to handle stress calls. Your case made us think." Jack listened quietly, then said, "That's good. That's how it should be," the chief nodded. "We also wanted to honor Rex. If it's all right with you, we'd like to include his story in our training sessions. A reminder of what can happen when fear replaces understanding." Jack took a deep breath. His eyes softened. "Yes," he said. "That would mean a lot." That evening, he walked to the spot behind his house where Rex's wooden marker stood. The grass around it had grown thick and green. He placed a small photograph there, one taken years ago of Rex sitting proudly beside him after a mission. He whispered, "You're still helping people, buddy." The sun dipped low, painting the sky orange and pink. It was one of those rare moments when Jack felt at peace again. Not the fragile kind he'd known before, but a deeper one that came from purpose. As days passed, the story continued to ripple quietly across communities. More articles came out, more policies were written, and more people began to speak up when they saw something wrong. Jack didn't try to lead anything. He didn't start movements or attend rallies. He simply lived, the way he always had, with honesty and calm. But his name became something people mentioned when they talked about patience, truth, and integrity. The town itself began to change too. The same young men who had once mocked him now avoided his gaze when passing by. One day, one of them came to his door, eyes downcast. "Sir," he said quietly, "I'm sorry for what happened. We were stupid that night. I didn't know it would lead to all that." Jack looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You learned," he said simply. "That's what matters." "Don't forget it." The young man nodded, visibly relieved, and left. Jack closed the door softly behind him. Later that night, he sat by the porch fire, watching the flames flicker. He thought about the long path that had brought him here, the years of service, the loss, the struggle, and now this strange peace built from honesty and persistence. He realized something then. Maybe this was what all those years of training were truly for. Not the battles overseas, but the quiet fight to make the world a little better at home. He picked up the old notebook where he had first written down the events of that night. On the last page, he added one more line. "Truth doesn't end pain, but it gives it meaning." As time went on, people slowly stopped talking about the story. New things took over the news. But the changes it sparked remained. Policies rewritten, lessons learned, hearts softened. Jack continued to live quietly, tending his garden, fixing things, helping neighbors when they needed a hand. Children who once watched Rex now came by to play near the fence, and Jack would smile at their laughter. He even adopted another dog, a rescue this time, gentle and shy. He named her Hope. She wasn't Rex, and she didn't have to be. She was a new chapter. Every morning, the two of them would walk down the same dirt road, the same path Jack had once walked alone. Hope stayed close, her tail wagging softly as the first light of dawn touched the trees. People driving by would see them and wave. Jack would lift his hand just as he used to and smile. And though the ache of the past never fully disappeared, it became part of something larger, a story not of loss, but of transformation. Jack had learned that sometimes, the strongest kind of strength wasn't found in combat or courage. It was found in forgiveness, patience, and truth. The quiet man who once wanted to be left alone had unknowingly become a symbol of what it meant to face pain with dignity. And in that quiet little town, long after headlines faded and people moved on, one story continued to be told about a man and his dog, and how their bond taught an entire community to listen with heart instead of fear. The years passed quietly, and the seasons rolled by one after another. The little town where Jack lived seemed to move at its own slow rhythm, untouched by the noise of the outside world. The same trees that once stood bare during the cold months now bloomed every spring, their branches heavy with white flowers that scattered softly across the dirt road like tiny pieces of snow. Jack had grown older. His hair had turned more silver than gray, and the lines on his face had deepened, but his eyes still held that same calm strength, a look of someone who had seen too much and learned to carry it with grace. Hope, the gentle rescue dog he had adopted years ago, had become his closest companion. She followed him everywhere, always patient, always quiet. She didn't bark much, but she stayed close to his side as if she understood the space that once belonged to Rex. Every morning, Jack would pour himself a cup of coffee and step out onto the porch. Hope would sit beside his chair, tail brushing lightly against the floor, her eyes on the rising sun. Jack often spoke to her as if she could answer. "You know," he'd say with a smile, "you came into my life when I didn't think I could start over again. Maybe you were sent to remind me that love doesn't end. It just changes." Hope would tilt her head as if listening, and Jack would chuckle quietly to himself. The people in town had come to know him better over the years. The same faces that once avoided him now waved warmly when they passed. Children who had grown up hearing about the man and his dog would sometimes stop by after school to help him with small chores, stacking wood, painting fences, or watering the garden. Jack never asked for help, but he never refused it either. He had become a kind of quiet guardian of the town, the man everyone trusted, the one who always listened without judgment. When someone faced trouble, they came to him for advice. He never gave long speeches. His words were simple but full of weight. "Take care of what you love," he'd say. "Don't let anger be louder than truth." One summer evening, the new police chief, the same young man who had started the department's training program, came to visit. He brought a small folder with him. "We're hosting an event next month," he said. "It's to honor service animals and their handlers. We'd like to dedicate a small memorial section to Rex, if that's all right with you." Jack sat in silence for a while before answering. His voice was soft. He'd like that. He never asked for attention, but he earned it. The chief nodded. "We'd also like you to say a few words if you're comfortable." Jack hesitated. He wasn't used to speaking in front of crowds. He had spent most of his life working in shadows, away from eyes and applause. But something in him felt this was important, not for him, but for Rex, for all the moments they had shared, and for everyone who had ever loved and lost. "I'll think about it," he said. For days afterward, he carried the thought with him. When he worked in the garden or walked down the road with Hope, he kept replaying what he might say. He didn't want to sound like a speech. He just wanted it to sound honest. When the day finally arrived, the weather was calm. The event was held in the small park near the town center, surrounded by oak trees. A modest crowd had gathered, officers, families, and even a few old veterans who had come to show respect. Jack stood quietly near the back, wearing his faded jacket. Hope sat beside him, her leash resting loosely in his hand. When his name was called, the crowd turned to look at him. He walked slowly to the front, his boots pressing softly into the grass. The microphone waited on a small stand. He took a moment before speaking. His voice was steady, low, and warm. "I never thought I'd be standing here," he began. "I came to this town to live quietly, to forget the noise of the world. I never wanted attention. I just wanted peace. And I found it, for a while, with a friend who never asked for anything but love and loyalty." He paused and looked at the faces in front of him. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was a soldier, a partner, and a reminder of what trust really means. He saved lives not just on missions, but in ways people couldn't see, by keeping a broken man whole. The air around him was still. The crowd listened without moving. "When I lost him," Jack continued, "I thought that part of me was gone too. But then something unexpected happened. People started to care. They started to see what had gone wrong and how to fix it. Change didn't come from anger. It came from truth, from people willing to listen. He took a slow breath, his eyes glancing briefly toward the sky. I learned something important after all this. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can choose how we answer it. I chose not to hate because hate never heals. I chose to speak because silence can sometimes be the loudest mistake. He looked down for a moment, his voice softening. And today, seeing all of you here, I realize that even loss can lead to something good, if we let it. He ended there, simply, without ceremony. The crowd was quiet for a long time before gentle applause spread through the park. It wasn't loud. It was the kind that came from genuine respect. After the event, people came up to shake his hand to thank him. One young officer, barely out of training, told him, "Sir, your story is the reason I joined. I wanted to be the kind of officer who listens first." Jack smiled faintly. "Then you'll do just fine." That night, when he returned home, he sat on the porch again, the air cool and clean. Hope rested her head on his foot. Fireflies blinked in the dark. He thought about the path that had led him here, all the pain, the patience, and the strange grace that had followed. He felt something deep and peaceful settle inside him. Not happiness exactly, but a kind of understanding. Life, he realized, was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be lived with all its breaks and mending, its losses and new beginnings. The next morning, he drove out to the small training center where the police held their classes. He had been invited to see the new memorial plaque. It was a simple bronze plate mounted on a stone. It read, "In memory of Rex, loyal partner, brave protector, and reminder that trust is sacred." Jack stood there for a long while, his hands in his pockets, eyes steady. Then he smiled. "You did good, buddy," he whispered. When he turned to leave, he saw a young officer practicing with a service dog, a shepherd, alert and eager. Jack watched quietly, noticing how gently the officer handled the leash, how carefully he gave each command. It made him proud, not in the loud way, but in the quiet kind that stays inside your heart. As time went on, Jack's story slowly faded from the news, but it lived in the memories of those who had heard it. The world kept moving, but small changes rippled outward. New training, better awareness, more respect for the bond between humans and their animals. Jack grew older, but he never grew bitter. He spent his days writing small notes in his worn-out notebook, collecting lessons he wanted to leave behind. He called it the Quiet Book. It wasn't about war or loss, it was about peace, patience, and forgiveness. Sometimes he would read a few pages aloud to Hope as she lay beside him, tail wagging. "You're part of this too," he'd tell her. "You helped me remember how to live again." When people visited, they always left feeling lighter, as if something inside them had been set right. Jack had a way of reminding others that kindness didn't need to be grand, it just needed to be real. Years later, after Jack passed away peacefully in his sleep, the town held a small gathering at the same park where he had spoken. The townspeople placed flowers by Rex's plaque, and next to it, they added another. "In memory of Jack Rains, a man who taught us that strength can be gentle, and truth can heal." Hope was taken in by one of the local families, and she became a favorite among the children. They would often sit beside her at the park, listening to stories told by their parents about the quiet man and his loyal dogs, and so, even though Jack and Rex were gone, their story continued. In the lessons that shaped a community, in the hearts of people who learned that compassion is stronger than anger, and that even the smallest act of truth can change everything. Every spring, when the white flowers fell across the dirt road leading to Jack's old house, the town seemed to grow a little quieter, as if remembering. Some said they could still see a figure walking down that road in the early light, an old man in a worn jacket, with a dog by his side. Maybe it was only a story people told, or maybe in some way, it was real. Because love like that, the kind built on trust, loyalty, and quiet courage, never truly ends. It simply walks beside us, unseen but always near, reminding us that even in loss, there can be peace. And that's how the story of Jack and Rex, two souls bound by loyalty, became not just a tale of pain, but a lasting lesson in humanity.